Yo, Darious Britt here, and today we're breaking down Pulp Fiction. If you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. Like now, seriously, go watch it. This film doesn't really need an intro. It should be required viewing for anybody who wants to be a filmmaker. It was written and directed by Quentin Tarantino. This happens to be the film that put him on everybody's, hey, watch this guy list. If you're trying to learn filmmaking and screenwriting, then it helps to break down movies into their various story elements. Every film is a textbook. I will leave a link in the description section to a video on 3-act structure if you are not familiar with that. So this film doesn't follow the classic Hollywood 3-act structure. It makes more sense to kind of think of this film as like 3 interconnected short films with their own protagonists. 4 if you include the Pumpkin Honey Bunny story. Total runtime is 2 hours and 34 minutes. It's about that time to get into it. Story 1, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. A couple discuss the finer details of robbing, then proceed to rob the diner they're in. Next sequence, setup, stories 2 and 3. The next segment is the setup for stories 2 and 3, plus we establish 2 very important characters. Vince, who will be the protagonist in story 2, and we got Jules, who will be the protagonist in story 3. Jules and Vince chat about how different McDonald's is in Paris on their way to a hit. Story 2, inciting incident. Vince mentions that Marsellus Wallace has asked him to take his wife out to show her a good time in his absence. There's only one problem. So Wallace is the type of guy who will break people's legs if he catches somebody massaging his wife's feet. Yeah, don't mess with wifey. They get what they came for and turn this guy into Swiss cheese. Setup, story 4, Marsellus and Butch. Butch the boxer accepts a bribe from Marsellus Wallace to throw a fight. Butch bumps into Vince on the way out. They're definitely not going to be BFFs. Notice that Vince and Jules' clothes are different. That's because this happens later in the timeline. Rising action. Story 2. Vince and wifey. Vince buys drugs, takes Wallace's wife Mia out on a date. Drugs, milkshakes, dancing. Mia ODs on Vince's stash. Climax. Story 2. Save Mia. Vince takes Mia to his dealer's house, and then this happens. Story 2, resolution. Mia and Vince agree not to say anything to Wallace about what happened. And then we jump to story 4, Marsellus and Butch setup. War veterans hide watches in their asses. Inciting incident, story 4. Butch murders the other boxer that he was supposed to lose to. Now Marsellus Wallace wants him dead. Rising action. Lovey-dovey. Butch's girlfriend forgets his daddy's ass watch. Snap! Butch goes back to his house, finds the ass watch, and also finds Vince, the hitman, dropping a deuce in his bathroom. He turns Vince into Swiss cheese. Bet you didn't see that coming. Craziest coincidence ever. Hit and run. Story 4, climax. Wallace and Butch find themselves captives in the basement of 2 weirdos and their pet leather Pokemon. Weirdo 1 takes Wallace's cupcake. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Butch and Wallace are now cool. They're not friends, but they're not enemies either. Story 4, resolution. Butch leaves LA with his girlfriend, Chopper style. Next. Story 3, Jules the Savior. Now we jump back in time to the first hit that took place in the movie, and we kind of continue that timeline. Story 3, inciting incident, the miracle. Jules and Vince get shot at, and this happens. Die, you motherfucker! Jules then takes this as a sign from the Lord above to change his life and become a prophet. Rising action. Vince kills Marvin by accident. Hashtag hitman problems. Both hitmen get cleaned up at Tarantino's. They get help from the wolf to ditch the bloody car. Surprise. Jules and Vince eat at the same diner as Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. You know what that means. So now we have a good idea of what happens when. We already know that Jules and Vince make it out alive because they meet Marsellus Wallace later on in the bar after Marsellus is talking to Butch the boxer. It's all so clear. Climax. Story 1 and story 3, standoff. Pumpkin tries robbing Jules. Bad idea. Jules gives Pumpkin money and a special message. Story 1 and 3, resolution. Nobody gets shot. Both parties leave the diner unharmed. Boom. Structure. As I stated earlier before, it makes more sense to kind of look at this film more like 4 interconnected short films. People like to kind of point at Pulp Fiction and say, look, there is an example of a movie that like completely defies story structure. It's not entirely true. No, this film does not defy story structure. Sorry to disappoint you, but it definitely has a structure. Each of the stories has a protagonist with a problem to solve. Pumpkin and Honey Bunny are the leads in story 1. Vince is the protagonist in story 2. And Jules is the protagonist in story 3. Butch is the protagonist in story 4. It's just presented to you in a non-linear fashion so you can put all the pieces together yourself, kind of like a cinematic tapestry. Each story has a beginning, a middle, and an end with an inciting incident, a rising action, climax, and a resolution. At the time when this came out, it was a pretty novel concept because there weren't any films that had played around with the chronology of the narrative. Now, not so much. Lots of films kind of play around with the order of things. Character. None of the characters are likable people, but they're written in such a relatably human way that we still connect to them, and they're just entertaining to watch. The film definitely has some memorable characters. They're so colorful that they're almost like caricatures. Jules is by far the most dynamic character of the bunch. He's a thug enforcer turned prophet after a perceived miracle. Funny thing is, I know people like that. I can totally relate with this character. The other characters don't change per se. They're definitely more stuck in their ways, but their relationships with each other changes. So that still gives us the feel of a satisfying character arc. Notes. Pulp Fiction kind of works on several different levels. First off, you've got these super original yet very bizarre situations that the characters find themselves in. The dialogue is a thing of beauty. It's designed to sound real, but it's actually very, very stylized. Quentin Tarantino has the remarkable ability of kind of just stripping away all the dull bits about everyday speak and then heightening the more entertaining bits. Saying he's talented is a disgusting understatement. The guy's a genius. It's not just how they speak, but what they talk about as well. You got two hitmen that talk about McDonald's in Paris on their way to a hit. Butch's girlfriend talks about how she thinks that like pot bellies on women are sexy. Watches in asses. Enough said. It's just so quirky. There is also a lot of humanity in this film. There are scenes with violence and gore, but there are also more than a few moments where we get to watch people just being people. I see a hitman blow a guy away, and then later on I see that same hitman talk about milkshakes. The contrast is very engaging. It's a well-known fact that Tarantino likes screwing with his audience. A lot of the humor in this film comes from subverting and trivializing the macho image. And then there are the outrageously Twilight Zone-esque coincidences, and let's not forget the glowing briefcase. There are so many theories floating around on the interwebs about what might be in that briefcase. Leaving that whole thing open was just hashtag genius. Without a doubt, Pulp Fiction is a hallmark in cinematic history and should be required viewing for anybody who's even thinking about doing this filmmaking thing. That said, this film is definitely not for everyone. We got violence, it's gruesome, we got rape, we got implied torture, we got more N-words than you can shake a stick at. All these things will probably definitely turn some people away. For those of you who are a little more on the sensitive side and they don't like to kind of see these things, hopefully you can get past it and enjoy it for the cinematic masterpiece that it is. And also, on a side note, for any people out there who's looking for like feedback on scripts or short films, I do some consulting. I'll leave a link in the description section. Also offer like, video chats where we can just talk about your goals in filmmaking, take a quick peek at some of your work and give some feedback. More details below. Well, that's all I got for you. If you enjoyed what you saw, please like or subscribe. You can find me on the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, or the Twitter, baby. You can also check out my second YouTube channel, DARIOUS BRITT, where I vlog about my adventures on the film festival circuit, my first feature-length film, unsound live casting vlogs, etc., etc. I do believe that's all I got for you suckers. Deeper down. Booyah!